On October 15th, 1923, Berlin resident Betty Scholem wrote to her son. She said, "Conditions have taken a catastrophic turn here. This letter cost 15 million marks to send, and it will be 30 million beginning the day after tomorrow." She estimated her expenses in the billions as the monthly rate of inflation approached 30,000%. Now, I thought an episode about hyperinflation would be simple. I'm a little late in getting a new episode, so I figured a Wikipedia cut and paste about numbers and percentages and bad economic management. But it turns out money is so much more complicated, and looking after a national currency is not about simple economic management, but actually is more like the greatest soap opera ever written, filled with drama, scandal, murder, politics, greed, fear, defiance, war, and desire. And the repercussions are enormous. The collapse of money in 1923 fuels the vibrant intensity of the Weimar Republic, which was a revolutionary society, but not born from a successful revolution, but out of utter defeat, where everything has collapsed, everything has been defeated: authority, morality, society, and now money. And hyperinflation propels the terrible rise of extremist groups and ultimately the Nazi Party. So, I started in Wikipedia and ended up surrounded by a pile of books trying to get my head around the wild drama of economics. Welcome to the Weimar Spectacle, where I explore the brief and extraordinary life of the Weimar Republic. I am Bremner Fletcher Duthie. Singer, actor, and theater maker. I have spent years performing songs and theater and cabaret from the Weimar period, and I'm inspired and maybe more than a little obsessed by that moment in time. In 1913, one US dollar was worth roughly 4 German marks. By November 1923, in Germany, 10 years later, hyperinflation had pushed one US dollar to be worth 4,210,500,000,000 German marks. An inconceivable number. By then, it was quite common to be carrying around a 1 trillion mark banknote, so, you could make change. But the journey through this hyperinflation changes everything in Germany. It makes beggars, it makes billionaires, it destroys an entire class of people. It changes morals and ambitions and sexual morality. It fuels the rise of right-wing and left-wing revolutionary dreams. It stokes the fears and hatreds and racism that lead to the Second World War, and it still affects today's Europe. Okay, full disclosure, I am the absolute worst, or maybe the best person to be telling this story. I am terrible with money. It flows into my life, I hold on to it briefly, then it disappears and I have to scramble around looking for more of it. I'm terrible at budgets. When I had a checkbook, I couldn't balance it. And for larger national and international discussions, when someone on the news is talking about GDP, balance of payments, and basis points, well, I get this ringing noise in my ears and I nod my head wildly, try and look as if I have the faintest idea of what they are talking about. Now, I have a sneaking suspicion that I'm not the only one in this situation. So I'm hoping my vast initial ignorance and my sweat in trying to understand what the hell happened in Germany between 1913 and 1923 will mean perhaps this episode will move at a pace that will allow others who are similarly affected to understand the incredible drama of money in that period, and also maybe understand how there are shades of that drama still going on today. Certainly, I started this research with great confidence in the cash I have in my pockets, in my cards, in my bank accounts, and also the cash we all store in things like houses and cars and all our worldly goods. And I have finished this research and this podcast wondering if maybe the most wise, practical, clear-cut, logical, long-term money decision I can make is simply to fill up an old bottle with gold coins, wrap it in brown paper, and bury it in the backyard. So, my big idea for these podcasts is that the Weimar Republic invented everything about the modern world, and we are still dealing with the possibilities and problems that it gave to us. To prove this possibly unprovable idea, I'll be exploring the art, arts, politics, science, architecture, social innovations of the Weimar period, and of course, the terrible and irresistible rise of the Nazi Party. So, if you are a young vegan or an old vegan furious at how every economic analysis today uses the price of a carton of eggs as an international currency standard, or maybe you're an old carnivore or a young carnivore outraged at the cost this morning of a ham and cheese omelet at the Waffle House, then this is the podcast for you. I will have images from the period with the various crooks and criminals and heroes and wheelbarrows filled with money, and links to the books that I read from my research up on my site at www.bremnersings.com, BREMNERSINGS.com, where you can also listen to my own albums of songs from the Weimar period, since singing old songs is actually my real gig, and you'll find a Spotify playlist of some of my favorite music from that period. So, hyperinflation in Germany. Here we go. And as much as it makes my head hurt and I dread it, I'm going to do some of the theory first, because as Mark Twain said, if you have to eat a frog, best to eat it first thing in the morning. But I'll also include the cultural issues, since actually the history caused the terrible economics, and then the horrible economics brought on the terrifying history, and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And living in November 2024, when the word inflation was just being thrown around like some kind of battle axe by both sides during the American election, and indeed may have swung the whole election, well, the toxic mixture of rising prices and rising extremism feels very, very current. So as we all know, money is magic. Magical thinking, that is. We assign value to something that actually has no value and then use it to create order and some disorder in our lives. I still remember being a child visiting my relatives in England, and the banknotes were printed with the words, "Promise to pay the bearer on demand," and then the amount of the note, which as a child, and to be honest, still the present day, confused the hell out of me. Why is a bear involved? And if you have 10 pounds, surely you have 10 pounds, and then what are you going to exchange it for at the bank? Another shinier 10-pound note? Of course, the phrase means that, in theory, the bill you were holding was simply an indicator that the Bank of England, or indeed England itself, had enough value in gold or land or whatever it was choosing to use to back that issue of currency, that in case of need you could walk up to a teller and get the equivalent in silver or gold or a bag of wheat or a quarter inch of land in the Lake District or whatever. For a long time, most currencies were backed up by piles of gold sitting in bank vaults, which means a country was limited in the amount of money it could issue. Nowadays, in most countries, as far as I can understand, we just all choose to live the delightful and extremely useful mass illusion that our money has some intrinsic value. To understand the madness of 1923 in Weimar Germany, when people are literally carrying piles of banknotes in wheelbarrows trying to buy anything that will hold its value, since by tomorrow those same notes will be virtually worthless, to understand that, we need to go to the start of World War I. A moment when Germany is simply one of the most successful economies on the planet, the symbol of rising modern industrialism, prosperity, stability, and optimism in Europe's most efficient, powerful economy. As the war is starting, the German mark is sitting at a healthy level of around 4 marks to the dollar. From the outside, it looks like Germany is overwhelmingly powerful. Huge iron and coal reserves, a booming industrial sector, massive railway system, skilled and educated population, and a massive army. What could go wrong? However, what wasn't immediately obvious was that Germany had some huge issues. They go into the war short of cash, and they are now at war with almost everyone, almost all their neighbors, so they have no one close by to trade with. And since it's essentially landlocked, apart from the Baltic coast and the North Sea, it was incredibly vulnerable to the British naval blockade of its few ports. A blockade which stopped all international trade, the possibility of earning more money from that trade, and its ability to import food for its population. The German High Command have a simple answer to this. They will crush everyone around them in a matter of months and take their things. The money and food will come rolling in from the factories and agriculture and industry of France and Belgium and Poland and Russia, and after the war, when Germany controls most of Europe, it will impose devastating reparations on its neighbors who, in Germany's view, started this whole mess, and it will simply make them pay for the war. Obviously, this didn't work out so well. However, to the planners' credit, it wasn't a crazy idea. Most of the wars since the fall of Napoleon had only lasted a few months. Only 40 years earlier, they had fought a war with France that lasted 6 months, but had more or less been decided in the first 3. So Germany's plan to move in with overwhelming force, with the most modern, well-equipped army in Europe, sounded convincing. Except this is the first modern war, and it doesn't go as planned. They launch into the war with the conviction it will all be over by Christmas. But still, they need to pay for it. And Germany's assets at the beginning of World War I in 1914 would have been sufficient to finance only about 2 days of the war effort. And they just can't print more money because they're on the gold standard. That is, their mark is backed up by piles and piles and piles and piles of gold sitting in vaults, and the German central bank only has the right to issue a limited amount of cash. Indeed, by law, in Germany at that time, paper money can only make up 2/3 of the money circulating in Germany. The rest has to be in silver and gold and other metals. So they're limited in the amount of cash they can put towards the war effort. And because of the blockade, the British blockade of their northern ports, they can't trade their way into prosperity. They can't sell things internationally to get the money to wage war. So at least internally, for their own population, they abandon the gold standard. And they do this partly because of the intuition of the German people, who are not fools, and when war breaks out, suddenly get suspicious about the actual value of these pretty pieces of paper in their pockets. Germans begin to walk into banks carrying bundles of notes, ask for the equivalent in precious metals, and walk out clutching sacks of gold and silver and, I presume, bury those in their backyard. However, the German war machine desperately needs gold and silver, not just to build things with, but to buy important military products overseas, later on to speculate on the international money market, to buy up marks to prop up their value, and also to justify the printing of more paper money to pay for the war, to pay the wages of soldiers, to subsidize industries making weapons, to buy those weapons, to pay the overtime wages of railway workers who are moving the army, to pay the pensions of wounded men coming back from the front, etc., 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 etc. So, on August 4th, 1914, a new law declares that paper money can no longer be converted to gold. And in the hopes of getting all that gold, the coinage, back from the pockets of its own population and into the bank, the German government runs a massive propaganda campaign, Gold for the Fatherland, in which they ask all citizens to exchange their precious metals for paper money. This campaign even included training school children to harangue their parents into turning over their savings. A pamphlet is printed where 3 high school students explain to a foolish old man, skeptical about the trustworthiness of the central bank. The foolish man asks, but what if they start printing too many notes and they lose their value? And the children laugh at his crazy, insane, unpatriotic fears and say, how ridiculous! We can count on the Reich. What would happen if the Reich Bank began to print notes without paying attention to its gold stock? It would immediately suffer a loss of confidence. The notes would no longer be accepted, especially abroad, or if accepted, it would only have a low exchange value. In the pamphlet, of course, the old fool realizes the Reich Bank would never do anything to endanger the confidence in Germany's money, and he rushes to hand over his gold. And, ironically, and spoiler alert, actually, that pamphlet describes succinctly, more succinctly than I could ever do, exactly what the Reich Bank did do. However, despite all the propaganda and all the mean little children lying to their parents, overall, there were 5 billion gold marks in circulation in the whole of Germany, and only 2 billion end up in the hands of the bank. Many, many unfoolish old Germans refused to dig up their stashes of gold. Now, as we all know, the war didn't end by Christmas, or for several more after that, so things did not go as planned for the German High Command. However, at first, they didn't go terribly. By 1915, Germany controls most of Belgium, with its great cities of industry and craft production, its huge swaths of industrial, mining, and agricultural lands, and they control much of northern France, with half of France's coal mines and much of the textile and metal production of France. And on the Eastern Front, almost all of Poland and all that industry is under German control. So, 1915. The mark is now around 5 marks to the dollar. And here goes the beginning of the story of the disaster of hyperinflation. The Reichsbank goes to the dark side. And to be honest, this is the bit I have read like 1,000 times, and the whole thing still seems like black magic to me, but please bear with me. Here we go. In order to get more money into the economy to pay for the expenses of war, but wanting to appear like the money is backed by some kind of solid assets, the Reichsbank sets up loan bureaus in all the states and communities of Germany. Those bureaus are there to give loans in paper money to those communities for the expenses of war. And those states and communities guarantee those cash loans from the Reichsbank with the assets of the community, and with the possibility of selling German government war bonds to the population of those communities. And those loans from the Reichsbank to the communities have no firm due date. Okay, so far. But here's where the magic sleight of hand happens. And this is where the central bank claims those guarantees of value from the communities and the towns and states as assets to justify printing more paper money, which again goes to the loan bureaus to be handed out to those same states and communities to pay for more debts for the war effort, and again be guaranteed against more potential value in those states and communities, which the central bank again claims as their own, each time inflating the amount of money that could be printed against the potential value of the states and communities, and so on and on and on and on. Essentially, it's a way to make the printing presses and the mint run all day and night printing more money. If that seems like it makes no sense and your head is already hurting like mine is, then you are perhaps as perceptive as the several German economists from that time who were threatened with prison or military court-martial if they printed their warnings against this system. Okay, we're coming up to the middle of war, and inflation is beginning in Germany, but it's happening in all the warring states. In the UK and France, inflation is going up for the same reason as in Germany. They're struggling to pay for the war. Prices of necessities are going up, and as they go up, wages need to go up. But as wages go up, prices also go up, and round and round and round and round. However, in France and the UK, they can still count on international trade. And more importantly, they borrow huge, colossal sums of money from the USA. Whereas in Germany, the British blockade is tightened as the UK declares they will stop all German imports, not just military goods. And as an aside, in doing that, the UK also is breaking all international norms of war as they deliberately target and starve the civilian population. A senior British defense official says, although we cannot hope to starve Germany out this year, the possibility that we may be able to do so next year cannot be dismissed. And hunger sweeps across Germany with whole winters where the only nutrition is turnips. Eggs are rationed out at 1 a week. Meat and fat is unattainable. It's estimated that by the war's end, 750,000 civilians die in Germany because of starvation attributed to the blockade. And still, Germany needs more money to pay for the war. So this time they reach out to their own population. They sell war bonds with a guaranteed 5% interest rate, not bad, payable win or lose and backed by the value of the German state, redeemable after the war. And the population responds massively. 98 billion marks of war bonds are bought by the German population. A massive loan to the Reich from its own people. A massive statement of belief and loyalty and love for their own country. And most of the people making those loans are the middle class with a bit of cash to spare. And not only the middle class, but a very specific and very important part of Germany's pre-war population, the Bildungsbürgertum. Let me try that again. Bildungsbürgertum. Any German speakers in the audience, please write to me with a correction for that. Bildungsbürgertum. who for generations have been civil servants or lawyers or professors or bourgeois merchants or even Protestant pastors essentially working for the state. This huge segment of the German population have built up savings, have comfortable homes, perhaps a rental property or two, and rely on their steady, comfortable but not immense wages from the government, and are resolutely loyal to Germany. These are the people who put all their faith and money, sacrifice their own children to the war effort, and it is these people, an entire class, that later the German state will deliberately destroy by stealing their money and ignoring their desperation, and who will respond in fury and anger and misery by listening to the lies of the Nazis. However, in the middle of the war, Germany still expects to win, recoup all its losses, and pay back its debts. The finance minister, Karl Hefferich, makes a speech in the Reichstag parliament saying, "We intend and are entitled to not forget the question of costs. We owe this to the future of our people. The entire future maintenance of our life as a nation must, insofar as it is all possible, remain free of and be relieved of the enormous burden of debt that the war has caused to accumulate. It is the instigators of this war who deserve to carry this lead weight of billions. Let them drag it through the decades to come, not us." And in a terrifying military document unearthed in an ex-East German secret police Stasi archive in the 1950s, the German High Command considered how they are going to get all the wealth, with a document that considers destroying Belgium completely, turning smaller European countries into vassal states, ensuring that the French economy is completely dependent on Germany, and at the height of the war, when Germany is in control of so much foreign territory, they prove how serious they are about sucking value out of their conquered territory by systematically pillaging and destroying the industry and agriculture of those countries. 20,000 factories are destroyed or simply dismantled and shipped to Germany. Millions of cattle and other animals are stolen and sent to Germany. At least 125,000 workers are deported to Germany to be used as forced labor. And of course, on the other side, treaties are being made to redraw the post-war map of Europe, the Middle East and Turkey in the Allies' favor, cutting up those regions to create new colonial empires for France, Britain, and Russia, all with zero consultation from the local population. And France intends, if they win, to punish Germany in the most extreme fashion possible with the intent to destroy their economic prosperity for generations to come. Everyone is making brutal, toxic decisions which are still affecting us today. Neither side is really with the angels in World War I. Anyway, back to the money trail. By March 1918, after the victory for Germany against Russia and the imposition of crushing reparations against Russia, the German mark, after dropping to around 7 marks, has improved to sit around 5 marks to the dollar. International money markets are optimistic about Germany's victory and expecting a new stability to occur in Europe quite soon. However, things don't go as planned. Against the wishes of many of the leaders of Germany, the High Command decides to wage all-out war on Atlantic shipping with their brand new U-boats, submarine warfare against merchant ships bringing supplies to the UK and France, and also against civilian boats, which leads to the infamous sinking of the Lusitania, with 120 U.S. civilians on board, thereby pissing off the largest economy on the planet, which is never a good idea. And America enters the war, and by 1918, 10,000 American troops a day are arriving in Europe, and in Germany, their final massive push to win the war before the USA arrives in full force is a sort of catastrophic, victorious failure, as they push to within 60 miles of Paris, but in doing so they lose so many of their elite forces, stretch their lines so thin that they also hollow out their army, and in only a few weeks they are in retreat, and before 100 days are up, Germany is asking for an armistice, a pause in which to negotiate a surrender. Germany just lost World War I, and so will be the one saddled with all the debts of the Allied countries and will never recoup all the money it has spent. Well, that was a hell of a lot of war. Apologies to those who came in expecting only Weimar economics, but like I said, it turns out that it's impossible to understand the terrible drama of the economics to come without the horrible history of the war. So post-war Germany is a disaster. It falls apart. The Kaiser abdicates, princes flee, the government falls, revolutionary workers' councils take over industry and army. If you want the details of that collapse, check out my episode on the revolutionary beginnings of the Weimar Republic. However, what doesn't disappear is the absolute intent of the victorious countries to hold someone accountable for the debts that they have run up during the war and to find someone to take all the blame for the war. The armistice is essentially a long pause while those countries get together and make up a wish list for extracting money, territory, and assigning blame. All the blame. And those decisions are all wrapped up neatly in the Treaty of Versailles, which Germany will be ordered to sign with no negotiation. A treaty that will strip them of land and territory and burden them with reparations that will stretch on for generations, and also ask them to accept total and complete responsibility for World War I. Now, as much as Germany acted unbelievably badly during the war, the actual causes for the start of World War I are so complex and so obscure that scholars are still arguing about it. There are reasonable arguments to be made that Germany felt it was forced into the war. That argument would run something like, the heir to the Austrian throne is assassinated. Those killers run to Serbia, where essentially they publish letters to the editor boasting about it, and the ruler of Serbia congratulates them, which is sort of like if Irish terrorists had killed the prince in line for the English throne, it will be the current one, not Charles or Harry, but the bald one. Can't remember his name. And then they sat in Dublin posting videos about what a great thing they did, and the Irish president pressed like on those videos and then shared them. One doesn't have to think hard to decide what the English would do in those circumstances. So Austria decides to invade Serbia. But Germany has a treaty to assist Austria. But Russia and France have treaties to assist Serbia. There are attempts to defuse the whole thing until Russia mobilizes all its military, puts them on trains pointed at the German border, and at that point Germany sees itself as surrounded and puts its soldiers on trains pointed at the French border. And because Britain has a treaty to assist Belgium, when the German armies cross that border, all hell breaks loose. Essentially a war no one really wanted. And other interpretations are totally possible, but that's one idea. And so the Treaty of Versailles and that enforced acceptance of complete responsibility, so hated in post-war Germany, becomes yet another piece of the fuel for the fires that will destroy the Weimar Republic and serve to push the Nazis into power. But it's not like France and England have any choice. Each of them have gone billions of dollars in debt during the war, in debt to America. And America is not budging an inch on the need to repay those loans. So they need to get the cash from somewhere. And by somewhere, they mean Germany. And if they want to legally justify getting all that cash, they also have to get Germany to accept all the blame. But still, even with that, the German mark is now holding more or less steady at 7.4 marks to the dollar. International investors believe that with the war ending, even with the reparations, Germany will quickly return to its pre-war status as an efficient industrial engine. But that doesn't happen. The British decide to maintain the naval blockade during the armistice negotiations, thereby continuing to illegally starve civilians inside Germany for the better part of a year and prevent post-war Germany from resuming trade. Meanwhile, inside Germany, politicians are just trying to hold the country together. They can see the terrifying bloodshed and chaos just across the border in Russia and are trying to avoid the collapse of their own country into a Soviet-style Bolshevik revolution. And so the left-wing, moderate social democratic party are allowed to take the reins of power to siphon off some of the desire for radical change. Even the richest men and the largest industrialists see the need for compromise, and they meet with workers' councils and agree to demands like an 8-hour day and worker representation on the management boards. Then, When the armistice ends and a treaty is ready to be signed, well, the evil German general, General Ludendorff, had carefully stage managed the surrender of Germany by passing the buck to the civilian politicians and then exiting stage left, thereby making it look like the army had actually never surrendered, which again fuels the later Nazi claims that Germany was never defeated. And instead, the new civilian democracy were the ones who had given up. And so it is two civilian politicians who travel to France to sign the Treaty of Versailles, and so their new Weimar Republic becomes weighted down with the origin story that they were the ones, not the mad generals, who saddled Germany with the crushing debt of the treaty, which, to add insult to injury, wasn't even enumerated as a specific total in the treaty. They essentially signed a blank check and were told that the Allies would later write in the total of what they wanted, but which would definitely be billions and billions and billions, which sort of justifiably infuriates the entire country. The leader of the German parliament makes a speech where he ominously warns, "Be mindful, you enemies, that from the bones of the fallen an avenger will arise. German women will still continue to bear children, and these children will break the chains of slavery and wash away the ignominy that has disfigured the face of Germany." All right, in Germany, the stage is now set for this wild ride of hyperinflation. However, on the other hand, in post-war UK and France, inflation is also getting out of control as they struggle with debt. But unlike Germany, each of these countries makes the decision that the most important thing is to get inflation and debt under control and reestablish the strength of their currency. They had financed their war with loans from America, and also, like Germany, by selling war bonds to those citizens who could afford them. And they decide the most important thing is to repay those loans. And to do this, each bring in brutal austerity programs, cutting services and laying off huge numbers of people. Returning servicemen who had risked their lives for their country are told those countries cannot afford to look after them. And essentially they're ignored and thrown out on the scrap heap. In post-war Britain, millions of men are unemployed, with only minimal state support to keep them and their families alive, a brutal decision that is considered by those men a kind of class warfare and leads eventually to the rise of the British Labour Party. However, the new German Social Democratic Party has other priorities than just paying back debts. They need to avoid a Soviet-style revolution. They have huge aspirations to bring about social change. They want to avoid a reason for the army to stage a coup and restore the monarchy. They want to get German industry working again. They also somehow want to show the Allies it is impossible for Germany to repay the huge reparations bill coming from the Treaty of Versailles. And so, essentially, they decide to sacrifice their currency to do that. They decide on a policy ironically called fulfillment, which in government speak actually means the opposite. While attempting to fulfill the treaty's terms, the German government would consistently aim to show the impossibility of doing any such thing. And to do so, it would use any means possible, including manipulation of the currency. That's a lot of history and economics and treaties and war. I would like to imagine briefly the actual life for people in Germany just post-war. What is happening to people there? It's been years of total war, which means that every resource of the state was pledged to the war effort. All the men were sent to the army, and the factories, for the first time, have been mostly staffed by women who have done a fantastic job. Immediately the armistice is declared, suddenly those women are kicked out of work to open up places for the millions of returning soldiers, which is partly just sexism and partly because the government is terrified of having hundreds of thousands of men, often still with their weapons, roaming the street with time on their hands. And those women are reluctant to return to their former lives and villages and are often choosing to stay in the cities. After all, the country has just been declared a republic, the Weimar Republic, so everyone is testing the limits of their new freedoms. Radical politics have taken over in all the cities, and left-wing and right-wing paramilitary groups, armed with the weapons they brought back from the war, are fighting each other for control of various cities. Right-wing factions of the army try to stage a coup which is beaten by a massive workers' strike which shuts down the country. And in Munich, a young racist army officer with a terrible mustache and no actual life skills has just come home from his time in the army, convinced that the war was traitorously abandoned just at the moment of victory because of Jewish and communist control of the state. And as the armistice drags on and the Allies are deciding on the terms of the treaty, everyone, right, left, and center, is expecting that their country will be treated as a dignified enemy combatant who is about to be given a path back to being part of the international community. Let's move on. It's early 1920. The value of the mark has taken a plunge as investors watch the attempted coup take place, see the chaos in the government, and worry about the recovery process. And the mark is now listed at 90 marks to the dollar. However, investors still believe that Germany will soon be back on its feet, and they make the huge mistake to swoop in and buy up cheap German marks, believing they can make a quick profit by selling them when they recover their value. I guess I should be more sympathetic to the suffering of international money traders, but maybe the one bright spot in this whole thing is knowing how many of them lost their shirt on that bet. Since for a normal person in Germany, a plunging mark means total misery. 90 marks to the dollar means your paycheck is essentially disappearing day by day. Contemporary journalists traveling through Germany write about how one meal in a nice hotel costs as much as a normal person spends on food for the entire month. How people are cooking without meat or eggs, and if you want butter, you have to buy it on the black market. And for those middle-class families who invested their generational wealth in German war bonds in a show of loyalty to their country, well, they are waiting to find out when and how those debts would be paid back. They must have been made nervous by the publication by the brilliant young economist John Maynard Keynes entitled Economic Consequences of Peace, where he writes, "By a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens." When the butcher's bill finally comes due for Germany, well, damages to the French and Belgian infrastructure during the war easily get totaled up to around 100 billion marks. Plus, there's the billions of marks that were borrowed from the Americans. So the final total demanded is 132 billion gold marks. And by gold marks, they mean hard currency. Germany could not simply print that money. The first payment happens by sending 560 cases of gold, selling massive quantities of cheap paper marks on the foreign exchange markets to earn enough hard currency, and borrowing from German companies with savings held overseas. However, after that, Germany is now essentially broke. So they need to earn more money by selling internationally. So how to stimulate exports? Well, once again, a devalued mark would make German goods cheap on the international market. So another incentive is there to consider manipulating the currency. And ta-da! Not much later in 1920, the blockade is over. The value of the mark, however, stays low, holding steady at 84 marks to the dollar. And Germany now is miraculously booming. German goods are cheap for foreign buyers, and so trade is flourishing. Factories are humming, and unemployment is falling. What could go wrong? Well, a brutal, vicious cycle could set in. All this success means that the German mark gets stronger, i.e. fewer marks to the dollar, which means that German goods get more expensive, which means that trade drops, so factories start laying off and unemployed workers get angry and go looking for the guns they brought back from the war and join one of the left or right-wing paramilitary groups, and then the heads of industry make angry calls to their friends in government. So naturally enough, the finance minister and the central bank do their best to make sure the mark gets weaker and weaker again. That is, they print more money. So much money. I am putting this podcast out in early winter 2024. And at this moment, just to survive as a modern human being, we have all had to learn new, very important critical thinking skills to keep our heads above water in a sea. No, not a sea, deluge, a tsunami of conspiracy theories pouring out from every media outlet and every social network. Many of us in America are spending Thanksgiving listening to our nearest and dearest and most beloved family members spout complete gibberish they learned was true, absolutely true, from a friend's social media post. And in Germany in 1920, it's pretty much the same. As the German mark starts to fall, the average German doesn't see the mark as falling. Instead, they see the dollar as something that is rising, inexplicably rising and getting stronger and stronger. And people, in a desperate desire to hold on to value, put their money into the stock markets, hoping to buy something with a fixed value. So stocks are going crazy. And since for generations, the Jewish population have often been restricted in what they could do, and one of those things they can do is deal with money, the average German sees the stock exchange and the American dollar as something controlled by the Jews. So a new conspiracy theory arises that the Jews are the ones causing inflation and making money worthless. A British journalist writes about being unable to spend his German marks in a country town as the shopkeeper refused what he called Jewish confetti. And in Munich, that more than a little insane ex-army officer, who it turns out is also a brilliant, inspiring, rousing speaker, is adding that story of a Jewish conspiracy to devalue the German currency to his tale about the Jews and communists who forced the surrender of the German army just as it was on the verge of success in World War I, and people are listening. Cities across Germany have made some pretty extreme choices at this point, with far right-wing, far left-wing groups taking control, and Munich is the center of every right-wing nationalist anti-Semitic group. There's Hitler, spouting his mad, appealingly simple racist ideas, and there's also the terrifying organization Consul, a secret group mostly filled with very well-educated, very racist young former army officers, and with the sole purpose to murder politicians and public figures, preferably Jewish, who they believe have betrayed Germany either in the war or after. They succeed brilliantly, ironically killing two of the extraordinary politicians who were responsible for stabilizing the country after the war, Erzberger and Rathenau. Ironically and tragically, each time one of their assassinations succeed, the killings cause such chaos and international fear that the German mark plummets in value once again. So we're into 1921, which in itself is quite a year. The prime ministers of Japan and Spain are murdered. There's a military coup in Portugal. Race riots in Tulsa destroy a whole neighborhood. Russia's still fighting a civil war. Greece and Turkey are at war. England is fighting a brutal war in Ireland. Unemployment's out of control in the USA, France, and Britain. And in Italy, a brand new party, the Fascisti, under the leadership of Benito Mussolini, has just entered parliament with 29 representatives. And in Germany, in the autumn of that year, the value of the German mark now sits at 150 marks to the dollar and is just about to go off a cliff. The politician Matthias Erzberger is murdered by organization Consul. And God, it is all tragic irony at this point, because Erzberger had been the architect of the best chance to stop hyperinflation. He had created a new tax system for Germany, because since international trade was a whirlwind of currency manipulation and swings of unemployment, the idea was that a modern tax system would surely provide a steady income for the state, so they could slowly pay off the burden of reparations and build a new modern Germany. Now, I've been living in the USA, where the 1% owns 90%, and where a few angst-ridden, honest billionaires go on TV begging the government to close loopholes in the tax system to force them to pay their share, and where a whole lot of happy billionaires don't go on TV saying stupid things, but simply take every tax loophole available so they can pay nothing. But what if there was an even better trick built into the system, so you could pay your taxes in full, and it didn't hurt at all? Imagine if your tax bill arrived in April. Say it's, for the sake of argument, 100,000 mark, which, for the sake of argument, say is worth $10,000. But you have a month to pay it. And it's also possible to ask for a delay of a few months, or perhaps appeal, or ask another question, delay payment. And what if every month that passes there is inflation to the point where at the end of, say, 6 months, that 100,000 marks is now worth $10? So you simply drop by the tax office, reach into your pocket, and pay it with a single banknote. That is what happens to the new German system. Even knowing that that means catastrophe for any functional state, I cannot say that I am not faintly jealous. So there's no money coming from taxes, yet there's reparations to be paid. And inside Germany, there's war pensions to be paid and a country to be rebuilt. And most importantly, there's an entire class of people, 15% of the German population, the Bildungsbürgertum, the civil servants, academics, lawyers, pastors who invested so much of their life savings into the German war effort and who are now eagerly awaiting the repayment of those war bonds with 5% interest. Well, what if a country could play the same trick with inflation? Delay, postpone, suspend, and all the time the value of the money you owe those people is slowly disappearing. An estimate of the value of the entire German war debt, the entire cost of running World War I, including all the money they gained and spent from those war bonds, was 143 billion marks. But by the end of 1923, that amount had been reduced by hyperinflation to 14 Pfennig, 14 pennies. I'm just going to repeat that since my mind explodes at the thought of it. The entire cost of Germany's war effort, 143 billion marks by 1923, has been reduced to the small change you find at the bottom of your pocket. Certainly, the Bildungsbürgertum could have demanded their money be repaid. The state would probably happily have done so, but I imagine the cost of cashing the check would have been more than the amount written on the check. And even worse than that, as the inflation turns to hyperinflation, the savings account built up over years, over generations, is suddenly not worth the charge to withdraw the money. An apartment bought as rental property suddenly has tenants who can pay a year's rent with their small change. And your fixed wages from your skilled government job for which you trained for years and which are paid to you every month suddenly cannot cover even a few days of expenses for you and your family. The middle class lose everything, and in understandable anger and resentment, many fall prey to wild conspiracy theories. The economist John Maynard Keynes again writes with chilling foresight, Germany has confiscated most of the means of livelihood of her educated middle class, the source of her intellectual strength, and the industrial chaos and unemployment which the end of the inflationary boom seems likely to bring may also disorder the minds of her working class, the source of her political stability. And things get much worse. Spring 1922, and the value of the German mark is now at 284 marks to the dollar. Inflation at this level is insane. Insane in the sense money is destroying the country while making it more prosperous, if that makes any sense at all. Trade has been stimulated, unemployment is down, production has increased. German net national production grows 10% in 1920, 7% in 1921, but the cost of living goes up 40%. Children are being diagnosed with malnutrition. Basic necessities are difficult to find, much less buy, and with more tragic irony, because of inflation, there are huge profits to be made for those who already have money. Imagine you have a factory, makes a chair for export worth, say, 1,000 marks, which, let's say, is perhaps equal to $10. You ship it to the USA and get paid $10. Put that $10 in the bank in the USA for a few months, and when you bring it home, it's now worth 100,000 marks, which you invest into land or buildings or another factory because the last thing you want to own is money. And because you now own all these material goods, lands, building, you can go to the bank and use that collateral to get a loan to buy more of them, perhaps a loan of 1 million marks, repayable, say, in only a few months. And you know where this is going? In a few months, you walk back into the bank and repay that loan with your pocket change. The rich got much richer and much more powerful. And then things get even worse. France and Belgium had the right in the Treaty of Versailles to physically take possession of German lands and industry if reparations were not paid. Above all, Germany wanted to avoid this disaster, which might lead to civil war or simply restart World War I. And the one man that might pull Germany out of its plunge into hyperinflation and chaos, find a way towards some sane compromise on the reparations problem and avoid the French and the Belgium taking German territory was the brilliant Jewish industrialist and politician Walter Rathenau. This was the moment also when there was a chance of change because even the Americans were rooting for some kind of compromise on the reparations that were killing Germany's possibility of recovery. The banker J.P. Morgan met the heads of France and Britain and said, "You must make up your minds if you want a weak Germany who cannot pay, or a strong Germany who can. If you want her to pay, you must allow Germany to exist in a condition of cheerfulness, which will lead to successful businesses." Walter Rathenau, who speaks perfect Italian, French, and English, has been involved in big business, was close to the Kaiser before the war. He is brilliant and urbane and charming and is the man for the moment, and as foreign minister is shuttling between capitals and sitting in late-night meetings with German industry leaders. He is the man who might get all of this on the road to some recovery. However, it was not to be. A brutal nationalist drinking ditty was being sung at that time in all the right-wing bars. It refers to Walter Rathenau and the Catholic Chancellor Wirth. Let me hum a few bars of this. If just the Kaiser would come back, Chancellor Wirth, to a cripple we would hack. The guns would rattle, tack, 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 against that rotten socialist pack. Whack Chancellor Wirth like it's no tomorrow. Whack his skull until it's hollow. Shoot down Walter Rathenau, that God-accursed Jewish sow. And so, unsurprisingly and tragically and ironically, on the 24th of June, 1922, Organization Konsul, the far-right group of smart, well-educated young men, murders Rathenau, Germany's best hope, in broad daylight, a symbol for the world that Germany is descending into chaos. And the world loses faith in Germany's recovery. By the end of July, the value of the German mark has dropped to 670 marks to the dollar and keeps falling. Prices are rising by 50% a month, the definition of hyperinflation. And now the most important thing for everyone in Germany is getting rid of their money, by which I mean that prices are changing daily and money is the worst thing to hold on to. You have to get it out of your pocket. At 3 p.m. every day, the new dollar rate is announced. So any money that you possess in the morning must be spent before 3 p.m., since at that moment its value will plunge again. Although one very, very smart young student who might today be the envy of all modern American university students currently struggling under the insane weight of student loans, well, he figures out how to game the system. He writes, "I went to Holland that spring looking for anything that would earn hard currency and found a job. And by spring vacation, I'd saved 50 guilders, which was about $25. I used the guilders as security for a short-term bank loan back in Germany. And then later, I'd repay the bank loan with the deflated marks, take out another loan. I paid for a whole semester of school that way. And at the end, I still had the same 50 guilders. Not everyone was so lucky. Anyone who did contract work was completely screwed. A signed contract to deliver something for X amount of marks, say a piece of furniture or a new house, or any job contracted now but delivered in the future, that contract would condemn the worker to work for nothing, since whatever amount was agreed on today will be worthless when the goods are delivered. And anyone on a fixed income is essentially broke, which means retirees, disabled, civil servants, teachers, employees at state corporations like the railways, etc., etc., etc. Anyone on a fixed income must do constant workarounds just to stay alive, all of which involve getting rid of money as quickly as possible. One woman writes about the moment her husband's paycheck arrives. She says, he would receive his monthly salary and then immediately acquire a monthly pass for the railway as soon as possible so he could at least travel to work and back. Then the next day, the entire family would get up at 4 a.m. and go to the market and spend whatever was left on non-perishable food. And that was the end. For another month, there was no more money. But still, the government needs to keep the economy afloat. And now, with international investment drying up, there seems to be only one solution, which is to print more money. And anyway, they need more money. They need physically more money because as new 100,000 and 1 million mark notes start entering circulation, well, presses have to keep churning them out, desperately trying to keep up with the need for new banknotes to keep up with inflation. So the most important thing for the German government at this point is to keep the printing presses running. They're running 24 hours a day, and the state bank hires independent printing presses to start producing banknotes, and they are still falling behind. There's a crisis when for a single day the printing union goes on strike, and the president orders an executive order forcing them back to work. So it's October 1921. The value of the German mark has now fallen to 3,000 marks to the dollar. By December, it's 7,500 marks to the dollar. By January 1922, it is 18,000 marks to the dollar. And then things get much, much worse. The French have elected a new prime minister, a rabidly nationalist man called Poincaré, who is convinced, although not without cause, that Germany is manipulating its currency to pretend it is unable to pay reparations. So France and Belgium invade Germany and occupy the Ruhr Valley, the heartland of Germany's coal production and heavy industry. They intend to hold those lands and industries hostage, taking their production directly and also demanding that Germany pay up their outstanding reparations. And Germany declares a policy of passive resistance, a general strike across all the industry in the Ruhr Valley. And the German government promises they will make up all the money lost by the strikers and all the industries affected by the strike. Hundreds of thousands of skilled laborers and massive manufacturing corporations are promised that their lost wages and profits will be replaced. And to do that, the government simply prints more money. Now, I got to admit that around this point, I sort of lose my mind, my ability to totally understand what the hell was going on with the endless printing of more money. These are smart people. What were they thinking? And okay, I admit I'm the worst at understanding how money works, both on a micro-personal level and on a macro-national level. But even I can sort of understand with some sort of gut instinct that this is probably not a great idea. The best explanation I can come up with is that at this point they are simply in too deep. No one knows how to turn off the flood of money without chaos and starvation and civil war. But at the same time, everyone is kind of aware they are walking towards a cliff edge, and as you'll shortly see, confidently striding off that cliff edge. Before we get to that cliff, one can ask, what, apart from artificially boosting trade and letting the rich get even richer, were the good things about inflation? Well, if you're a renter, because Germany had rent control, your rent is fixed and can't rise along with inflation. So the portion of your money going towards your rent drops to, well, close to zero. If you had bought a house with a mortgage, well, you have the ability to pay off that mortgage with the money that you might carry in your wallet. Another odd side effect is that for Germany's middle class, at that time, even in the early 1920s, a woman was still expected to bring a dowry in the form of a large cash payment from her parents into a marriage. And when the family's savings set aside for years and years to pay that dowry disappear, a lot of planned marriages are canceled, and many women find themselves instead entering the job market and realizing new dreams as independent women. Another very mixed blessing is that with no other choices, a huge number of people, some male, but mostly female, enter sex work. And there has been some discussion that some women do find in that world an opportunity to claim ownership of their own sexuality in a way that would not have been possible in a traditional, conservative, male-dominated Protestant marriage. And of course, for those who were able to convert their money into things, they could make so much money on the black market. The painter George Gross recalls a friend who was a chef in an upscale Berlin restaurant. Late one evening, George was invited back to the chef's black market stash. Gross writes, "On the top floor of a faceless house, behind triple bolted doors, we picked our way through crates of pots of jam, jars of tomatoes and pickles and delicacies, blue tins of Russian caviar, all piled high as the ceiling, that is, as much as one could see the ceiling, because from it dangled all kinds of sausages, Italian salamis, bolognas, slabs of bacon and ham. I don't know where to put it all," the chef confessed cheerfully. "Money isn't worth a damn these days, so even the hallways are bursting with the stuff." And then he set up a luxurious meal for Gross and toasted inflation. "Cheers, my dear fellow. Long live this fool's paradise." February 1923. The value of the German mark is now 28,000 marks to the dollar. A small donation of dollars from an American supporter turns into enough German marks to allow the Nazi Party to turn its party newspaper into a daily national newspaper. May 1923. The value of the German mark is now at 48,000 marks to the dollar. A German activist in the Ruhr Valley fighting against the French is caught and executed when it turns out he was once a member of the National Socialist Party. Hitler declares him the first martyr for the party. Hitler is now making speeches against what he calls the Jewification of the economy. He says the government calmly goes on printing those scraps of paper because, if stopped, that would be the end of the government. The state itself has become the biggest swindler and crook, a robber state. If the horrified people notice that they can starve on billions, they must finally agree. We shall no longer submit to a state which is based on the fraudulent idea of a majority democracy and instead demand a dictatorship. July 1923. The value of the German mark is now at 350,000 marks to the dollar. The printing presses produce the first 500,000 mark notes. Plans are made to create a 1 million mark note. Farmers are refusing to sell their products in cities, preferring instead to smuggle them into neighboring countries where they can sell for hard currency. Roaming gangs of starving city dwellers start to invade country towns and farms, stealing crops and butchering animals. August 1923. The value of the German mark is now 4.5 million marks to the dollar. A loaf of bread costs 200,000 marks. The German government is hemorrhaging money in its support for the Ruhr Valley and begins to make plans to abandon the resistance there. The Nazis declare this to be another decision of Jewish politicians betraying Germany. The national printing presses are working so hard to produce more money that states and municipalities are authorized to start printing their own bills. One produces a 500,000 mark note on which is written, "When my value is no longer enough to buy a lump of coal, please feel free to burn me instead." September 3rd, 1923. The mark is now at 9.7 million marks to the dollar. September 6th. 33.2 million marks to the dollar. September 7th, 53 million marks to the dollar. September 13th, 92.4 million marks to the dollar. October 1st, 242 million marks to the dollar. October 8th, 838 million marks to the dollar. October 10th, 2.9 billion marks to the dollar. October 31st, 25 billion marks to the dollar. November 15th, 2.5 trillion marks to the dollar. Today, outside my window, it is 2024, approaching winter, and still 4 years later, the whole world is coping with the collective trauma of the COVID lockdown. Some friends recently introduced me to their charming son, who at 20 years old is struggling with complex mental issues that mostly came on during the time he was isolated from the rest of the world. I'd ask you to imagine what it must have felt like to have money, this thing which orders our entire world, which we rely on at every moment, from the most banal transaction to the most important decisions we make in life, become, over the course of 2 years, instead of a symbol of order, possible stability, and literal wealth, become a symbol of complete insanity and unreliability, where the very worst thing you could possibly own was money. Personally, I have a terrible moment of angst in that tiny pause between when I place my credit card on the scanner at a store to when I see the word accepted. Whereas one shopper in 1923 writes, "The boy at the drugstore makes calculations on a paper bag. They seem to worry him. He begins them all over again on the other side of the paper bag. There are several weary shoppers waiting behind me in the store. At last he looks up and says, 'The price is 375 million marks.' I recover my breath, turn out my market basket in which million-mark notes are done up in bales." Now, I can't imagine the nightmare of having money turn into this rotting, terrible thing. I mean, nothing can excuse the actions of the German population during World War II. However, in terms of looking for ways to explain how they came to act the way they did, that collective trauma must have been a factor. Strangely, the end to hyperinflation, when it does come, comes very quickly. After a great deal of infighting from politicians and industrialists, where the captains of industry finally managed to get themselves a majority on the board of a new bank, thus ensuring they will have control over the post-inflation economy, a new currency is introduced, the Rentenmark. It's not based on the gold standard, since there really isn't enough gold left in Germany's banks, but instead it's based on the mortgaged value of the agricultural and business land in Germany. The value of one Rentenmark is fixed as 1 trillion old paper Reichmarks. And in a matter of a few months, that new stable currency replaces the old rotten one. And at the same time, France and Belgium are finally admitting that the invasion of the Ruhr Valley cost them more than they gained. American politicians are finally declaring themselves open to some renegotiation of the French and British war debt. A new reparations committee is set up for Germany, for the first time including members from Germany, to begin discussions on how Germany will pay its war debt. And a new German president passes tax decrees, which severely raise penalties for non-payment and get rid of the possibility of delaying payments. Germany begins to find its feet again. For ordinary Germans, the introduction of the new currency means a short period of intense hardship. However, mostly the morale of the country is good, and the hardest thing to learn is remembering how to deal with money, where butter doesn't cost 1 million marks, and where the next day the price of that butter is the same as it was the day before. Mostly, Germans are thrilled that some stability is coming to their lives. If all of this seems in any way familiar, well, that's the whole point of this podcast, trying to prove the unprovable idea that the Weimar Republic invented the modern world. And maybe this one is a little easier to prove than normal. After all, sometimes it seems like the last 20 years has been all about the drama of money. We've had to watch bank failures and bailouts, austerity programs, and unending fiscal crises. Greece and Spain and Ireland and Iceland have all had their bubbles and then been forced to cut services and spending. Brexit has hit the British economy like a European-made tank. And in the USA, financial institutions like Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, Freddie Mac, and Fannie Mae have become such infamous outlaws that they've made hit movies about them. The drama of money. We're still doing it, but man, Weimar did it so spectacularly and helped to give birth to the modern world. Thank you so much for listening. Hit subscribe or follow if you want to know when the next episode appears. I don't have any advertising budget for the show, or really any budget at all. I'm just some obsessed singer repurposing an old microphone. So if you leave a review, hit the star button. It really encourages the podcast to be found by other listeners, or just forward a link to a friend. That'd be great. And I hope you'll join me in the coming months as I explore more about the strange birth, life, and death of an experiment in creating a new society. I'll put images for this episode onto my website, bremnersings.com, BREMNERSINGS.com. You'll see images of all the heroes and the villains and the crazy money, and you'll also get a chance to listen to my songs from the Weimar period, if that's your thing. And who am I to discuss Weimar? You know, I am not a sociologist, a political scientist, or an historian. I am an obsessive artist, a singer, a playwright, a cabaret performer who has been obsessed with the arts and music of the Weimar Republic all my life. I've recorded 3 albums dedicated to the music of this time, and particularly the music of Kurt Weill and Bertolt Brecht. If you want to listen to them, again, just search for Bremner Fletcher Duthie in any music streaming site, and you'll find all my albums. And if you want to know more about my work, see the images from the period, or suggest a specific Weimar subject for a future episode, check out bremnersings.com. Thank you very much, and join me next time for another walk through the amazing creative madness of